Hello and welcome to the program. Today we're talking about Ukraine's perspective with the new government. After Zelensky's victory in the April 21 presidential election, he scored another big win on July 21st, when his party, Servant of the People, took a majority of seats in the new parliament, paving the way for one-party rule. Now, with a new president and a freshly elected parliament, opinions are split on whether Ukraine is entering a new period of political change. To answer this question, we're joined in the studio today by Yuri Polakiwsky. He's the author of Ukraine, a Lament of a Promise, political analyst and commentator. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So first question, it's kind of a general question. Why this title? Why the Lament of a Promise?
Well, when I was on the Maidan, I noticed that this was not only a political thing, but it was an existential quest. And I felt that it was like a lament of not only those things that were lost, but also this idea of creating a juxtaposition between what was lost and what could be, and this idea of what the promise can be. And I think that now you're seeing that 5 years later, you're seeing that, yes, there was many things that were hard and there were very difficult things, but yet we are now coming to a place of promise, hopefully, and that's my sense.
So you're saying that it is like this parliament and this new parliament which has been created for is a continuity of the hopes of the Maidan here?
Yeah, I think that what a lot of people don't understand, that this is a potential in Ukraine of a new narrative, right? It's no longer a new narrative that talks about, historically, it's a historical opportunity for the potential transformation of the society. What I never agreed with was this idea that Ukraine wanted to reform itself. People don't want reform. They're cynical. They didn't like that anymore. They saw that it was a reform, that it was the mentality of a perestroika. If you remember, a lot of the people that were in parliament or in positions of power, they grew up in a time, their political maturity was during perestroika. So they thought, okay, we're going to use that and use that as a basis for restructuring Ukrainian society. The people did not want that, and it was in my opinion, it was a failure. Changes occurred, fundamental changes possibly occurred, but that's not what the people wanted. So what we have now with this election, we see the potential for transformation. That is, we don't want everything that was there before. We actually want to put in new seeds to transform the society. You should ask me what I mean by transformation. And by transformation, I mean, sorry about that. But by transformation, I mean by planting new seeds or new principles, linguistic, political, that will actually change the very nature of that society.
But that's the thing, when we talk about transformation, some critics said that this is like in France, let's say, for Mr. Macron, kind of old world under like new wrapper. Of course, it's new media faces. Of course, you have what kind of looks like new political forces. Yeah. But some critics also said that the shadow of old forces of the old guard are still there. What's your take on that?
Well, that's absolutely true. What you see here is opportunity in the modern Ukrainian history to actually build a society, whether it be in the political, social, economic sphere, on a new set of values. I think those are Reformation values that came from, Luther and so on and so forth, and that particular narrative line. I think that it's not putting new wine into old skins. That hasn't worked last 5 years, and the people knew that. They want actually a fundamental change of values. And so I would add that now what we're building here is a society, not a post-Soviet society, but based on a new set of values. So I would say that this is not just about a question of politics, it's a question of moral values here. Things such as individual responsibility, but dignity of human being, right? Accountability. Family. These are very important values. The rewarding of hard work, economic justice, and so on and so forth. So these are a new set of values.
Now, you said the word post-Soviet, let's say, because also some commentators talked about characters such as Mr. Zelensky, maybe some also such as Mr. Polakiwsky, who are both from a mediatic, let's say, landscape, can be like some sort of like post-mediatic character kind of way. How to ensure that these characters, these people, won't just stick to their popularity, and will not be willing to sacrifice in a way their popularity.
You know what you have to understand here, and this is something that's very important for me, and I just talked about this with a bunch of politicians from a lecture I gave on transformational linguistics. And what I want to say is not the idea that it's media and so on, but if you notice, right, both President Zelensky and Mr. Polakiwsky using democratic language. They're changing the language of how they do politics, right? Yes, Media, those are what I would call details or process. But the fundamental principles there, if you listened, right? If you really listen, we're focusing in, even in the inauguration, we're focusing on fundamental values. This is the main difference, and this is a generational difference. The mentality of a Homo Sovieticus in that generation is gone. Okay? It's gone. So they're using a whole different language that is Western-based, I think, even biblically based in some issues, because if you're talking about dignity and so on, you're talking about the value and the centrality of the individual human being, right? And this is essential that's taking place. And with that, not only do you have a focus on human dignity, but with that individual responsibility, accountability, and what does it mean to be a good man or a good person and make a good society? Do you follow what I'm saying here?
Indeed, but you said, and you seem to have high hopes, which is good for this government. But there is still this state of grace, right? When someone has been elected, and you have this famous 100 days, which is kind of a let's say arbitrary thing.
It's an arbitrary number.
It's an arbitrary number. But still, he's still on this state of grace. What are the guarantees that after these 100 days, well, Ukrainians or the population won't get tired if the guarantees are not?
I don't take the when you're talking about such transformational change, forget about the 100 days. I mean, that's from Roosevelt times and so on. However, I think the importance of setting a deadline for certain things is important. Right? That means that you've been in Ukraine a while, so you know there's a lot of talking here, but it's a time for particular action. So now that there's agreement that here are the values that we want to follow. Now, and this is transformational. There's not been something like this has not occurred in Ukraine in modern history. So now you have the opportunity here, and the president is incumbent. It's incumbent upon the president to fulfill that promise. So therefore, whether Ukrainians who are traditionally cynical, yet I think, and that was with reform, there was a cynicism there, as I wrote in my article that you read in Atlantic Council. There's an element of hopeful expectation now. They know that they have elected people, right, who have a limited experience in parliament or in politics. People know that, you know. I mean, people have a condescension view of the Ukrainian electorate, but Ukrainian electorate knew exactly what it was doing. They set the mandate for both at the executive and at the legislative level. They know what they're doing. They know that they're inexperienced, and they're saying, you talked about a grace period. Grace period is fine. Right? However, you have to make clear commitments, and I think the government should be, especially the parliamentary, have to be given a deadline and saying that in the first 3 months, if you will, or the first part, the key element is to establish a new, rebuild or transform the institution based on those new values. Either you're going to put up and do it, which to a certain, I don't know to what extent. There's no guarantees in Ukraine for sure, but they must be pressured in the parliament specifically to do fundamental changes. Because the parliament is a symbolic element here, right? And if they see that their symbolism is changing and that symbolism becomes practical and actually something that can be grasped upon, then people will continue to support that.
As you said, it does imply that the structure of the parliament and the structure of these institutions are changed deeply and quite fast. How is it possible, even though you have a quite powerful 7 of the People Party and the Holos Party, which are both reformist parties, in front of the opposition platform and the For Life Party, which is, well, on the matter of reform, deeply conservative. How can they, overcome that kind of obstacles?
I think what they focus in on the fundamentals. A lot of people say, okay, we want change for change's sake. No, I don't believe in that. I think that what you have to do is you have to change the fundamental framework and the structures of the parliament itself. So, for example, parliamentary immunity, that's a no-brainer. People have been talking about that for 5 years. You can do that in one afternoon. The laws are written, so on and so forth. Let's get that done. And so in the article that you were referring to was that I was suggesting just a process of the fundamental structural change that is needed. So what I'm saying is, or what I'm suggesting is, focus in on getting those principles and the values, focus them on a fundamental institution, right? And then allow that to grow from those particular values. If you don't have the values, then you're not going to have the results of that. So I think that's where the discussion should be. And I think that from a critical point of view, opinion, commentators' point of view, should hold the government to account and say, listen, we're going to give you this amount of time.
So there is a deadline.
I would impose it. I wouldn't say 100 days. I mean, come on. We're talking about, let's be serious here. This is a place here where structural change takes place very, very slowly. However, here, with the excitement, if you will, and the exuberance of both the election of Sluhu Narodu and Holos, I would say, you have a working parliamentary majority where you can actually say, this is what we're going to propose, and vote on it very quickly, one after the other. And I think in my conclusion in the article that you were referring to, that would be a monumental change right there. But what it would say to people is that we have crossed the Rubicon, that not only now have we practiced the democratic institutions through our election, but now we're showing the actual democratic, the impetus of that democratic change in the structure and the framing of laws based on the rule of law. So I would say, if I can, it was only in the first tour, after being here for 5 years, right? I would say it was the first time that I used the word democracy in Ukraine. That door was opened in that first tour, right? That people say, and we walked through the door of democracy. That's not enough. Elections are not enough. It's the fact that will there be a particular change or a result of those of that democratic process? That's key. Otherwise, you know, it would be a sign of failure, I think.
Once and again, it is in a configuration, let's say, where Zelensky's party or Harsh's party are also, there's a lot of people from civil society there and idealistic people. Yeah. Can we imagine a configuration where that kind of concentration of power would be held, and it would be kind of a, you know, coming back to, I said, our times, and would be held by some people who are maybe less idealistic and, you know, less eager to go through a certain progress in society?
I having grown up in a democracy, I kind of know that. I think that it's a benefit here because you can use that parliamentary majority very, it has to be done with precision. Okay. What's my biggest concern is that you don't have an institutionalized memory in the Rada. They have a lot of new people coming in, right? And that is one of my concerns, is that the level and the proficiency of parliamentary practice, right, and the importance of getting key legislation through. Okay, this is a concern of mine. That's a concern of mine. Whether there is that expertise in which to do it, I would say to you candidly that expertise, I'm not convinced that it exists. Right? I don't.
Yeah, because that's what basically I'm always drawing the comparison with France's Emmanuel Macron here, because the situation, without being exactly the same, you had an overwhelming, some sort of a landslide, and then a parliamentary landslide victory, and then new faces in the parliament.
Right.
The old practices stayed in the parliament, and despite having new faces, as you said, there was not that much expertise. So at the end of the day, old faces were actually, more powerful.
The wonderful thing here is that the usual faces are gone. Right? I don't want to mention their names, but they're gone, and I'm going to see their faces soon as they're going to court and being charged with certain crimes. Okay, new faces are important. The thing that, and this is one of the ways we understand the election, which many people in the West, I'm not going to, whether Europe and North America, they go a new narrative. What many people have to understand is that you must now look at the Ukrainian people, right, as an electorate. They practiced a fair, they had a fair, free election.
And they're right as citizens.
The individual responsibility through the individual mandate, right? So they have to be seen as an electorate. And one of the things that people don't fully understand is that Ukrainian electorate set the agenda, the change agenda for this country. Whereas before, and still commentators think, oh, you know what, there's a political elite here, and there's an oligarchical system, I hope we talk about that in a second, that sets the agenda for this country. One of the things they have to clearly understand is that the people here voted in an overwhelming majority, right, for change, fundamental change, for economic justice, social justice, and so on and so forth. That's extremely important. These people knew what they were doing. Some even said, we're voting for the Sluha Narodu, we know about Zelensky, not inexperienced, but they knew that. But they clearly set the agenda and the mandate for for this for the country. Now, if the president or the parliament doesn't respond to that, you know what they're going to do?
Yes, indeed.
Right.
And, but as you said, there is still, and of course it's going to be, and it's going to take ages to change that system of having the presence of certain oligarchs around, and one of the main critics, and that will often comes to the table is the presence of Mr. Kolomoisky and this kind of a war between oligarchs here. What's your take on that?
I think that what we have, the oligarchs are on their back foot, if you will. What we saw here was with the mandate, the presidential one in particular, 75% or 75%. That's a democratic electoral slaughter. Mm-hmm. Okay? So what people want here clearly is the building of a post-oligarchical structure and a framework. That's without a doubt. And one of the things that I talked about and I thought about in some of the in a book I'm writing now is that the politicians here or the political sphere, culture, has to understand something that before them is a clear model they have to follow. They have to both destroy and create. That's the paradigm. They've got to get rid of and destroy all those the lingering aspects or remnants of Soviet mentality, laws, and so on.
But create a new society.
And create a new society. Mm-hmm. Okay, what I like to call a promise society. Mm-hmm. Right. So the key element in that is to understand one major thing is that the war with the oligarchical mentality and practice, an oligarchical practice, is totally anathema to democracy. Mm-hmm. Let me repeat that again.
I think like that. So we say that that's the next, and that's the biggest challenge that this government is facing.
That's the structure of the war.
Yeah.
So
that's the core. That's the core challenge.
I want to go on record to say this: if people in the West, whoever they may be, have relationships with oligarchs, right? Mm-hmm. That's a morally compromising situation. I want to call them out. Mm-hmm. You cannot say we're going to build a new Ukraine when you're still participating or communicating and or working sort of in partnership, if you will. Mm-hmm. That's a harsh word, with the oligarchical system.
I'd say.
You have to understand that the oligarchical system plus certain individuals, mm-hmm. they are, hate to say this word, but they are the enemy of the people, you know, for lack of a better term.
The sentence is a bit,
but that's the key. People have to realize that those individuals, right, are anathema in economics, in politics, and those individuals have to be marginalized. Those values have been discredited, mm-hmm. but they have to be marginalized and prosecuted, thrown in jail. Right, not politically motivated, but by the fact that they have broken the laws and not following the rule of law.
Well, thank you for reminding that. I'm sorry, we only have a limited amount of time. It would be lovely to talk more about this topic and to have you more again in our studio today. That was Yuri Polakiwsky, author of Ukrainian Lament, of a promised political analyst and commentator. Thank you for watching the program. Stay tuned for the rest.